No Man's Sky is a procedural space exploration game recently ported to VR. It's available for the Vive, Rift and Index for about $60 US. Here's my review of its VR implementation in its current state as of August 2019. Let's kick things off with my thoughts on the flat version, which at launch was a steaming pile of lies and broken promises, though today, having received several substantial updates, actually lives up to most of its pre-launch propaganda. The result is a somewhat decent sci-fi space sim, with a massive range of resources and craftable items, a counterproductive inventory system to manage it all, upgrade trees for your exosuit, multi-tool, exo crafts, ships, and base components, procedurally generated planets and organisms that still don't quite live up to the diversity and polish originally promised, a trade system that probably doesn't have what you're currently looking for, an enjoyable ground combat, passable space combat, storms every few minutes, temporarily ruining your performance, vision and overall enjoyment of the game, several exocraft that make planet exploration a lot more practical, copy-pasted ruins, buildings, and space stations, copy-pasted NPCs with copy-pasted conversations in 4 alien languages that the game makes you learn one word at a time, copy-pasted side quests that basically amount to kill, deliver, scan or photograph something, a story that I've barely mustered the energy to care about, 32-person multiplayer which I've yet to try out, base building similar to Subnautica but less intuitive, more grindy and glitchy as all hell, a purchasable freighter where you can send fleets on missions, build up a base, and browse your growing collection of starships that the game won't let you sell, the ability to name your own celestial and organic discoveries, though you probably won't, and more bugs than an at-launch Bethesda title. That out of the way, how well has it been ported to VR? We'll start with the player HUD, which floats several meters away in a fixed position and does not rotate with your HMD, meaning that when you turn in real life, the HUD doesn't follow, a terrible design flaw that really needs to be fixed. And although there is an option to turn the HUD off altogether, the game isn't really playable without it. The game currently does not offer a full virtual body, and while I've heard some complain that a disembodied head and hands is an immersion breaker, I'd personally prefer no body to a haphazardly tracked one, and without at the very least leg tracking, that's what you'd inevitably get. That brings us to the flying. Inside the cockpit you're faced with 3 interactable items, a throttle for acceleration, joystick for steering, and exit handles. Everything else is mapped to a button. All told, this combination does work surprisingly well, though it is certainly a lot clumsier than using keyboard and mouse or a controller, particularly in combat. My ideal solution would be transitioning between a HOTAS for flying and motion controllers for everything else, if such a thing is possible within Steam VR. A man can dream. Also worth a mention is the Galaxy map, which is so much better in VR. That brings us to Exo Craft. Steering is done with one or both hands gripped to the wheel, braking with the left trigger, acceleration with the right trigger, and button maps for everything else, all of which work well, as do the Exo Craft's weaponry, which are aimed with the HMD. For almost all object interactions, the game uses a grip and pull gesture, which I found both comfortable and intuitive once I'd gotten used to it. Targeting waypoints is done by pointing the HMD, which for some reason is very finicky. On that note, positioning items when base building can be so infuriatingly erratic, Fallout 4's clunky system appears psychic by comparison. Your multi-tool is holstered at your shoulder, which both works well and feels badass. Modes are selected via a holographic interface which does the job, but makes switching a somewhat slower process. Scanning mode is activated by clicking on your visor, which works brilliantly. As for the inventory menu, it uses a wrist-mounted pop-up display which is a breeze to use. Main menus occupy larger world-mounted panels which work similarly well. Also worth note, when engaging in dialogue or opening an object's interface, the game teleports you to a fixed position, which is both jarring and unnecessary. Locomotion is either controller-directed smooth or teleportation. Both are activated with the left trigger, though if you prefer trackpad locomotion, you can achieve this with Steam's fantastic controller menu, though you may struggle to rehome all the displaced bindings. The game also offers artificial rotation in both smooth and snap, with no option to change rotation speed or increment size. The game also lacks left-handed support, and given the amount of baked-in asymmetry, simply swapping controller bindings would create more issues than it would solve. Remember earlier when I mentioned the HUD not rotating with the HMD? A related consequence is that your jetpack boost, which is meant to propel you rapidly forwards, will instead propel you in the direction of your probably off-center HUD. That aside, jetpacking in VR is fun as hell, though very difficult to control. A vignette is offered for the motion sick prone, though it is very slight. That brings us to graphics. The game gives you a fantastic array of settings, and though I've had to dial most things back to standard on my 1070, the game still looks pretty good in my opinion. Text in particular is uncannily easy to read, and all round everything looks relatively crisp and physically convincing. Performance-wise, the game runs pretty poorly, and while I've personally found the game nevertheless very playable, I do have a fairly high tolerance. Also worth a mention is pop-in, which is significant enough in flat No Man's Sky, and as you might imagine is all the more noticeable in VR. That leaves us with the verdict. In spite of its issues, No Man's Sky is among the most innovative and thorough ports I've played in VR. In its current state it is still worth picking up in my opinion, as long as you're aware of and are able to excuse its current shortcomings.